Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to Vibing with Sleazy, the podcast. This is season 6, episode 16. I want to thank everybody for listening, tuning in, and downloading. This season's been a blast. I'm sorry that it's been a delay since the last episode's come out, but just super busy at the zoo, super busy working. Life gets crazy, but still pumping out these episodes for you. Going to be hopefully wrapping up the podcast here in April for season 6 and then do my break. Episode's been coming out great. Downloads been rolling in, and just lining up the last few guests and plans for the last few episodes of the season. With episode 16 and also episode 17, I want to do a two-parter. I'm going to do a story, which is the torture house of 1924 in Louisville, Kentucky, where I'm from and where I'm recording out of. Basically, this is a story of one of the many true crimes that has happened out of Louisville, Kentucky. I want to shout out historicalcrimedetective.com for the story. This is about a house at 637 South 34th Street in Louisville. And basically, it's just a story told by a detective. And I did a true crime episode in a past season, and it got a lot of love, and actually has gotten a lot of recent downloads. A few new listeners have reached out and said that they listened to the true crime episode and they liked it, and it was all based on Louisville. So I thought I tried to cover Louisville again in this one. The deal with this one, with me being part one, part two, it's about a 16-page overall story. So I want to do a part one episode and then roll into a part two. I haven't done a two-parter in a while. So this will be a two-part solo project here. And so this story is about the torture house of 1924 in Louisville, Kentucky. This is part one of the story. So originally, it's published by Torture House, which is the title, by Detective Lieutenant William Oeltjen, as told to Frederic Lord in the True Detective Mysteries of February 1930. So this was retold about 6 years later. Again, I want to shout out historicalcrimedetective.com. I want to give everybody credit where it's due, and this is a story, so we're going to start. Recently, while in my office in Louisville, I was pondering on the dullness of life, and you got to remember this was told to another person. So I'm reading this as I'm a detective telling this story to Frederic Lord. So recently, while in the office in Louisville, Kentucky, I was pondering on the dullness of life, in particular of a detective's life, when a question was put to me by a friend who dropped in for a chat. Lieutenant, do you remember the Gates Heaston case here in Louisville? Do I remember the Gates Heaston case? I replied. I don't suppose anyone who had anything to do with it will ever forget that story. My friend's query brought back the memory of the strange case, one of the weirdest I've ever known in all my years of police work, and after a few remarks had been passed, I consented to tell him the story. It was about 6:30 p.m. on Saturday night 6 years ago, March 8th, 1924 was the date, if I remember rightly, that we received the call at the Louisville Metro Department headquarters of the police. A man has been shot, the voice over the telephone shouted. You'll find him at 637 South 34th Street. Accompanied by several of the men, I reached the scene in record time. We found the body on the second floor in the bedroom. It was lying near a mattress, a circumstance odd in itself because the mattress was lying on the floor. Surrounding the mattress were four steel staples driven into the floor. No one missed the picture it created, together with a number of surgical instruments that were in the room also. Not much more than a glance showed us that a man was dead. There was a gaping hole in his neck, another near his heart, and several persons were in the room, and usually in the case they were incoherently babbling words about the killer. He had raced from the house, they said, when he made sure, on a doctor's word in fact, that his victim was dead. On a killer's wrists were handcuffs. His body was trembling, his face pallid. There is not much use to telling all the minor details. Here's the main facts as we ascertain them by rapid questioning. The dead man was Richard Heaton, 33 years old, partner in prosperous brokerage concern. And also, I'll be posting Mr. Richard Heaton's picture when I be posting all my social media stuff. So you'll be able to see the picture. Also, be posting a picture of the house. Um, Back to the story. So, prosperous brokerage concern, a well known, reputable citizen of Louisville, his home was on South First Street, where he lived with his charming and beautiful wife, two children, a boy and girl, both in the elementary grades of public school. His wife, who was related to a very wealthy Louisville man, was in the room, and so was a doctor, H.E. Schoonover, was happened to be in the neighborhood at the time of the shooting. The house was in good residential section of Louisville. So at this time, South 34th Street was considered a very luxurious area and a lot of money down in that area of the West End. Mrs. Heaton, who retained her composure with admirable fortitude, told us that William Gates, her husband's lifelong friend, had done the shooting. I at once obtained a description of Gates and went across the street to use the telephone. I called headquarters and gave the desk sergeant with what information I had. A hunt for Gates was immediately instituted. Returning to the house, I found that a crowd had gathered around and that my men were having difficulty in preventing the curious crowd from entering the house. I went back upstairs. Mrs. Heaton was still kneeling beside her husband's body. She said something that made me pinch myself to make sure I was not dreaming. She said that her husband had held Gates a prisoner for 2 nights and 2 days. He was chained to the floor in the room, she told us, and once the significance of the mattress on the door and the staples dawned on me. Never will I forget that room and its contents. I called Dr. Schoonover and explained that we examined the surgical instruments. The doctor commented on their quality and told me that whoever had selected them that had more than an ordinary layman's knowledge of such things. We found a surgeon's knife, several pairs of forceps, a hermostat, about a dozen suture ligatures, 2 or 3 instrument trays, a surgeon's apron, rubber sheets, and rubber gloves. There were quantity of bandages, medicated gauze, absorbent cotton, disinfectant, and a large can of chloroform, a complete outfit for performing an operation. The man who had planned the operation apparently had also planned to remove a body. In case the victim died, he provided 3 large watertight boxes, a large butcher knife, and a very sharp hatchet. We also found a quantity of sulfuric acid, and all it was about as gruesome a sight as anyone would care to see. By the time the fingerprint man had arrived, I had noticed imprints on most of the instruments, and I set the men to work. The rest of my men had been looking over the house and a small garage in the rear. They had found several guns, both revolvers and automatics, and a lot of ammunition. I was anxious to talk to Mrs. Heaton and direct the search for the man who had done the shooting. So, leaving Lieutenant Jim Cundiff in charge, I returned to headquarters accompanied by Mrs. Heaton. I had seen enough to realize that this was going to be a most extraordinary case. When we arrived at the office, Captain E.A. Larkin, then Chief of Detectives, was there. He started asking questions. I told him what I had seen and the little I knew. Then we called Mrs. Heaton on to the office. She was very pale and, considering what she had been through, seemed to have pretty good hold on herself. It was a little hard for her to start, but after a bit she began to talk. She told us that she eloped with Heaton some 8 years before, and when she was only 15 years old is when it happened. They seemed to have lived a happy and normal life until the spring of two. Suddenly, and without warning, she told us her husband began to accuse her of being intimate with Gates, whom they had both known since childhood. At the time, Miss Heaton said his manner and things he said almost became unbearable to be around. Of course, she denied his accusations, but Heaton, without any cause of reason, continued to berate her. This state of affairs continued for 4 years, in fact, up until the day before the shooting happened. About 4 weeks before, Heaton had brought a woman detective to his home, a Miss Jenny Moore of Chicago. Her duties were to accompany Miss Heaton whenever she left the house, to answer all telephone calls and prevent Miss Heaton from using the telephone herself. While I'm the subject of Mrs. Moore, I might add that her sworn statement, voluntarily given us a few days later, verified everything Miss Heaton told us that night. Miss Heaton was growing paler. I asked her if she did not want to rest a few minutes. She shook her head, asked if she might have a glass of water, and continue her story. On Thursday, her husband rented the house on 34th Street for the express purpose of taking Gates there and punishing him. I could see that it had taken a lot of effort on her part to make that admission. I was powerless to prevent my husband from carrying out his plan, Miss Heaton said. You see, I was practically held a prisoner in my own home. Friday, the day before the shooting, her husband came home. He told his wife that he still had Gates, but he laughed when he told me about it, and I was frightened more than ever. Saturday afternoon, Mrs. Heaton, not having heard from her husband since the day before and being almost frantic with worry, finally slipped away from Mrs. Moore, called a cab, and drove to the house where Gates was held captive. Her husband met her at the door, told her to come in, and cautioned his wife to be quiet. He looked terrible, Mrs. Heaton said. He seemed to be under a terrible strain, and plainly showed the lack of 2 nights' sleep. I felt sorry for him and told him so. He only laughed. I asked him if he had held Bill Gates upstairs, and he said yes. And I'm giving him the scare of his life. I bet he won't bother either of us again. Miss Heaton begged her husband to her prisoner go, let his prisoner go and give up his mad plan. Heaton absolutely refused to listen. They talked a few minutes, and then Heaton said he had to go back upstairs. I have to watch Bill constantly for fear he might get away, he told his wife. I guess he had been gone about 2 or 3 minutes when suddenly I heard a voice say, "Don't shoot." It was hardly more than a whisper, and then I heard 2 shots fired in rapid succession. As I started up the stairway, Bill Gates came running down. He called and asked who was there, and I replied, "Mary Lee." He didn't stop, and he passed me. He said, "I have shot Dick, and I'm going for a doctor." I also have a picture of Bill Gates I will be posting as well. Mrs. Heaton was nervously twisting her purse. Her voice was hardly above a whisper. I was afraid she was going to faint. I fetched her another glass of water. In a moment, she seemed to be all right. I continued on upstairs, she said, and found my husband in the rear bedroom, lying near the mattress, just as you first saw him. He was breathing and trying to say something. I couldn't understand what he was trying to say. In a few minutes, some men came in and told me he was a doctor with his men, and he looked at Dick and asked him if he was going to die. He said he didn't think so. Just then, Bill called from downstairs and asked the doctor the same question. Mrs. Heaton said she made arrangements with the doctor to call her family physician and have her husband taken to the hospital. Then another man came in, she continued. He looked at Dick and he said, "He is dead." Just then I heard Bill again call from downstairs, and the man called back and told him his husband was dead. I haven't seen or heard from Bill since. I knelt down and kissed Dick. I didn't know what to do, so I just sat there by his side. I know police officers are supposed to be hearted and all that sort of thing, but I must admit that I never felt so sorry for anyone as I did for this woman. I had hated to do it, and I know the captain felt the same way, but we had to question her. There were several things that were not clear, and of course, her story had to be checked. We had let her tell her story without interruption, going about as gently as possible. About 45 minutes of cross examination, we were both convinced she had told us all she knew and that she had told us the honest truth. I told Miss Heaton she could go and had some of the men take her home in a cab. Then we had some good news. Heaton's business partner was in the outer office and wanted to see the chief. He was brought in at once. Without doubt, he would throw new light on the case. Noticed the name was William A. Fisher and that he was a member of the firm of Heaton and Fisher, merchandise brokers of Louisville. He had heard about the murder and wanted to tell us all he knew about the affair. According to Fisher, Heaton for some time past had been acting queerly. He told his partner that several men was trying to break up his home. For the last year, he had neglected business, remained away from the office for long periods of time, and failed to let his partner know where he was or how long he intended staying. Fisher had tried in every way possible to get Heaton to attend the business, but Heaton had refused to listen to him. Early in February, he told Fisher, "There is only one man left. As soon as I attended to him, all my troubles will be over, and I will return to my office." Fisher knew about the house Heaton had rented in the West End. Heaton told him about it, and he was going to take the man there and scare him to death. "I want to impress on the man that he is never going to cross paths with me again," Heaton had told his partner. Fisher had begged him to give up on the plan. "I told him that it was dangerous and that he was only going to get himself into trouble. He refused to listen and told me if I ever breathed a word to anyone about his plans, I would have to answer to him." We were interrupted. Officers had brought into headquarters a man who they believed answered Gates' description. He was in the outer office. I rushed out. It wasn't Gates. The poor fellow was half scared to death. He had red hair. Gates had brown hair. I gave the patrolmen several different brands of call down and returned to the chief's office. Fisher resumed his story. He said that on Friday, Hay Conrad brought him a note from Heaton requesting Fisher to come to the 34th Street address that afternoon. I interrupted Fisher long enough to find out where Conrad lived and learned that he was an organist in one of the downtown theaters. I sent a couple of men out to pick Conrad up and bring him to police headquarters. I went down Friday afternoon. Fisher said, hoping to bring Dick to his senses. He looked terrible. I could see he was very nervous, laboring under a strain. He told me he had no sleep for 3 days and asked me to stay there in the house while he went home and slept. Then I refused to do that, and he asked me if I would stay where he went home and saw his wife. He promised he would only be gone for half an hour, and he begged so hard that I finally agreed. He took me upstairs. In the back room, lying on a mattress, his arms and legs tied to the floor, a cover over his face, was a man. Dick told me he had put the cover over the man's face because he was prisoner and ashamed of what he had done and did not want his identity known. He assured me the man was secretly tied and could not get loose, and then death. Then left. After he had gone, I noticed the man was moving as if he were trying to ease the evidently aching muscles. I asked him if I could do anything for him. He didn't answer, so I just sat there. In about 30 minutes, I heard Dick come in, and I went downstairs. I again begged him to let the man go. I told him he was sure to get into trouble. He laughed, and at my fears, assumed me again that I was only giving him a good scare, and I'm not going to be harming him in the least. While I was in the room upstairs, I saw a hat and a coat that I thought I recognized. I asked Dick if the man wasn't Bill Gates, and he said it might be and laughed. Then I pleaded with him harder than ever. I would have done anything to keep Dick out of trouble. He wouldn't listen. He asked me to come back that night. I told him I might and left. As you see, the story so far, as Fisher was telling it, was checking with the statement Miss Heaton had made. I don't know whether I mentioned it or not. Both these statements were made under oath. To continue with Fisher's story, after he left the house, he returned to the office, worrying all the while about Heaton. He decided not to communicate with the police, and such as Heaton had assured him no harm would come to Gates. He determined instead to go back that night and try once more to reason with his partner to give up the plans. I went down about 7 o'clock that evening, Friday. There was no one there but Dick and the man upstairs. I argued with Dick for about an hour, but nothing I had seen to have any effect upon him. He would only laugh and swear he had not given harm to the captive, only to scare him, and I gave up and started to leave. Just as I was going, I happened to look upstairs, and there, sitting on the bed of the rear room, handcuffed, with his head in his hands, was Bill Gates. I became almost frantic with my pleading, but he remained obedient to his plan. So I left and went home and did not go back. Someone called me to the night to tell me about the shooting, and I'm sorry I did not notify you yesterday what was going on. But at the time, I thought the best way was to leave Dick alone. I feel as though I am responsible in a way for his death. And I apologize. Some of these words in this story are from back in that day, so a lot of proper English. But back to the story. So Fisher had finished. I asked him if he had any idea how Gates had been captured, and if he could figure out how Gates had an opportunity after 3 days of captivity to get a hold of a gun. Those were 2 points in the case so far that we knew nothing about. Fisher couldn't help us on either one. After a few more questions, we thanked Fisher and told him he could go. Well, here we were. We knew, of course, who had done the shooting and the probable motive, but we were still without any trace of all important Gates. I wondered at the time why it was the case of self-defense Gates had run away. By now we had gotten a little more information about our man. He was 31 years old, a salesman employed by the Procter & Gamble Company, working out of Logansport, Indiana, where he lived with his aunt. He was very popular and well known in Louisville, where he had formerly lived. I had all the lines out and felt sure we would have him before morning. The fingerprint man came in and reported they had found Heaton's fingerprints all over the house, on the surgical instruments and on the revolvers, all of which didn't help much except to strengthen my belief at the time that Heaton had planned to carry out the plot alone. I studied the report carefully. The coroner called. He said Heaton had been shot twice, one ball piercing in the neck and the other just above the heart. The shots had been fired from a 41 caliber gun, which accounted for the ugly wounds. Still no word of Gates' whereabouts. Then the patrolmen brought Conrad in. They had picked him up just as he was leaving the theater where he was employed as an organist. Conrad couldn't tell us much, however. He had known both Heaton and Gates for some time the summer previous, and he had made extensive trip through the South with Heaton. Thursday, Heaton called him and asked him to come to his office about 6 o'clock that afternoon. When he arrived, Heaton introduced him to come to some man named Frank. He was told to go outside and wait in Conrad's car, and when Heaton left in his own, Conrad was to follow him. After Conrad had waited a while, three men came out, entered Heaton's car, and started off. Conrad followed, then drove home into the West End and stopped into the alley. The occupants of the first car got in and went into a house, Conrad following. When Conrad got inside, the man Frank was living in the living room. Heaton and the other man had disappeared. I asked Frank what was going on, and he told me that Heaton had some man upstairs who had stolen stuff from him. Excuse me, I'm going to read that again for you. I asked Frank what was going on, and he told me that Heaton had some man upstairs who had stolen some stuff from him. He told me everything was all right and not to worry. About 10 o'clock, Heaton came down and told Conrad to take Frank to the 10th Street Depot to buy him a ticket to Indianapolis and to go to the Willard Hotel and settle the bill for room 342. I took the man to the station but did not go to the hotel, Conrad said. I was worried about it all and went back to the house to see if I could find out what it was all about. Heaton told Conrad that he had some man who had caused him some trouble, but that he shouldn't worry, and he was having a good talk with him upstairs. Conrad said he spent the night there, and the next morning told Heaton he was going to leave and not return. Conrad assured us that this was all he knew about the matter and that he had not been near the place since Friday morning. I didn't like the looks of things, he told us. We held Conrad and sent a man over to the hotel to check up on the room 342 and the man's story, named Frank. Well, it was getting pretty late. We had a good line on the case, but where was our man? The man who had done the shooting. I certainly wanted to get him. I don't remember ever wanting a man so badly in my life. I felt instructions that if Gates was picked up, I was to be notified at once, and I went home to bed. So this is part one of the story. I will be bringing you episode 17. That'll be part two, where I will finish this mysterious story. Thank you.